MegaPacKid's Pride Mania was recorded in front of no one because I did this alone. June is my favorite time of the year because it's not only Pride Month, but it's also the month where a lot of gaming news happens, so I'm excited. Longtime fans of mine will know that I love reviewing, and I wanted to do some of that for Pride Month, so I decided to take a look at 7 different shows, all with varying levels of queerness to them. Some shows I only knew were popular with queer people, and some shows I knew fully well that they had a queer relationship in them. So I decided to watch the ones that I wanted to get off my queue, some of the ones that my friends were talking about recently, and just get them done and watched and reviewed. So let's go into that right now with Heartstopper. Heartstopper is a Netflix original series from 2022 based on the Alice Osman graphic novel series of the same name. This show is honestly a great start. It's wonderfully well written. All of the characters are great. I love all of the relationships and all of the lives of the characters. The fact that there are so many people who are in different stages of relationships, and the fact that Nick was figuring himself out throughout the series is fantastic. I really enjoyed the whole thing. The only complaint I have is the criminal underusage of the character Isaac. I have taken this as a personal attack on me, so Netflix, I will see you in court. The show is truly a good representation for people who are L, G, B, and T alike. Naturally, I'd recommend it to anyone who likes romantic comedies and queer things in general because this is just a really well done show. Side note, the actress Yasmin Finney is now my transition goals because, oh my gosh, I love her so much and she passes so well. It's not that trans people need to pass in order to be valid in their identity. I mean, I'd be a major hypocrite if I were saying that. But I mean, I honestly considered that she was a cis person and I looked her up to make sure that she was trans, but she is. She's so beautiful too. Oh my gosh. The next show I watched was Our Flag Means Death, which also came out in 2022 on HBO Max. It's basically historical fan fiction for pirates like Stede Bonnet and Blackbeard. It is also very queer. In fact, all of my friends were calling it the gay pirate show, and in the first few episodes, I wasn't really seeing that. I had made the observation that Heartstopper had set my expectations far too high in terms of queer representation because the show was so very queer because it was a romance. It would be like with any romance, how there's just things there. You know the orientation of these characters because they talk about it because it's there. The romance is the story. Whereas with Our Flag Means Death, the romance isn't the main story, at least not at first. The Gay Pirate show does have gay pirates in it, but the queerness is a little bit more of a slow burn, but this seems to be the standard. Characters aren't just going to go head on into a relationship with each other, because if they're main characters, either they're already in a relationship or they're going to get into a relationship, which seems to be how a lot of these queer shows work. The show was hilarious. David Jenkins did a fantastic job. I love the cast, I love the writing, I love the set pieces, the music. Ooh, I love everything about this show. Taika Waititi, I will watch anything that he is involved with, and I do mean that. Overall, Our Flag Means Death was a fantastic show. I just don't like the ending. I really dislike it whenever there's misunderstandings that happen in a show that break up two characters who were together. I particularly don't like endings that aren't happy endings, but in this case, even though it wasn't a happy ending, it still wasn't a satisfying ending. I call it the Amazing Spider-Man effect because the Amazing Spider-Man movies were building up to sequels that they eventually didn't get. You can't guarantee that you're going to get a second season. You can't guarantee success with film and TV. Now, some shows, like The Owl House, knew they were getting a third season, so when they do a cliffhanger, it's alright because they know that they'll be able to continue the story. But when it came to Our Flag Means Death, HBO didn't even reveal that a second season was coming until the beginning of Pride Month this year. I am glad that we'll be able to continue our adventures on the high seas, and I really do like it. I mean, this comedy had me laughing out loud. Laugh out loud. LOL. League of Legends. It's time to talk about Arcane. Now, I wanted to watch this show for one reason and one reason only. I'm not ashamed. I had seen queer people talking about this show, and I knew that there were queer people who were fans, but I wasn't really sure to what degree. As it turns out, this show doesn't really have queer people in it. I should rephrase, they aren't explicitly queer. I think at the very least, the character Vi is bisexual, though it's unspoken. Now, I do think that it's much more productive to assume that characters are bisexual as opposed to straight, but there was no relationship, there were no explicitly queer characters in this show. I mean, the only person who even considers Vi and Caitlyn to be dating is Jinx, who more so sarcastically refers to Caitlyn as Vi's girlfriend, and Jinx is very mentally unwell, which was done very well in the show. I mean, her scenes are supposed to scare you, and they scared me. Although, I will say that the writing for this show is, in my opinion, the worst out of all of these shows. Arcane is an adaptation of the story of the video game League of Legends, which I have not played. I'm waiting for the 3DS port. Look, I don't like it when characters split up for no reason, and honestly,
Powder and Vi splitting up was dumb.
I don't know if Vi and Powder are supposed to split up and Powder becomes Jinx in the game, but if it's done in the game like it was in the show, then the game didn't do it well either. I'm sorry. Not to mention, there were other aspects of the show that I really didn't like. The world is divided into the top side and the undercity, which is another cliche with young adult sci-fi. Look, the whole classist society thing I feel is overplayed in stories like this, like The Hunger Games and Divergent, how there are various factions, including with economics, but it just didn't feel right, especially because while we do spend an even amount of time between both the top side and the undercity, the top side is almost nothing but the government, which is boring. There are these two scientist characters named Jace and Victor who are trying to fuse magic and technology with something called Hextech, which is fine, that's interesting, and that's what the topside story should have been about because they both work in topside. But they make Jace a counselor. This world is interesting enough that I was curious about the government, but like in Star Wars, it shouldn't have been the focus. Arcane is a wonderful show with a wonderful world, but it feels like things go from 0 to 100 too quickly. They focused way too much on the council, and I am glad that they're getting a season 2 because even with all the show's writing problems, I think that they can be improved upon, and even if season 2 got canceled, I still feel like we've gotten a full show. That's one thing that I like about Arcane, is that even though it did leave off on a cliffhanger, everything was fine. I felt like the story had ended and was merely leading into another one, but I don't need the other one to feel satisfied. But this next show I'm going to talk about made me mad for other reasons. Now, the Owl House doesn't do any queerbaiting like Arcane does. In fact, the Owl House as a show didn't make me mad. It was the company the show is attached to, which is Disney. Now, as of the time I'm recording this, Disney had gotten into some hot water with supporting the Don't Say Gay bill. In fact, the Pixar film Lightyear had a same-sex kiss that was removed but then later put back, as well as the other Pixar film Turning Red, which had a lot more queer representation in it, but all of it was taken out because Disney is Disney. Disney does things that are homophobic and transphobic, which makes this show, written by a bisexual person, Dana Terrence, a light, In the Fog. Character Luz is bisexual and does get into a relationship with a character of the same gender, but she blushes with characters all over the gender spectrum, which I think is a great addition to the show. Personally, I don't think bisexual people get enough representation, especially if they aren't polyamorous. There's either straight characters or gay characters, and as someone who dislikes the gender binary, I don't think a sexual binary should necessarily be something that we stick to as well. The Owl House is very much in brand with Disney shows like Gravity Falls, Star vs. the Forces of Evil, Amphibia, and if you were a Cartoon Network kid, if you liked Steven Universe, you would like this, and if you were a Nickelodeon kid, I'm sorry about Dan Schneider. The Owl House also features the voice talents of Alex Hirsch, and I can't help but wonder if he had any influence on this show writing-wise, because not only is he very good friends with the show's creator Dana Terrace, but it also had a very similar feel to Gravity Falls, the show he created. Dana Terrance's first show isn't the Owl House, though. She handled the DuckTales reboot from 2017, and she did that pretty well, so I'm really glad that they gave her her own show. Unfortunately, the show is going to end at Season 3, and even then, Season 3 is going to be short because there were people at Disney who decided it wasn't a good fit for the Disney brand. You know, when they have shows like Gravity Falls, Star vs. the Forces of Evil, and Amphibia. I honestly can't wait for Season 3, even though it's going to be the end. One thing I didn't like was in order to get this video out on time, I had to watch the last 5 episodes of Season 2 on YouTube, because they weren't available on Disney Plus until June 29th. Why? In the thumbnails I've made for the individual segments of this video talking about the shows, I've included the streaming service I watched them on, and the Owl House is the only one where I had to include 2 streaming services. Most of these shows are original or exclusive to one platform, but because the Owl House was created for Disney Channel and not Disney Plus, it was put on YouTube for purchase in addition to being on Disney Plus for a subscription. But I don't understand why the entire series wasn't on Disney Plus. The next show I wanted to take a look at was HBO Max's Euphoria, which was a show I was nervous about watching, mostly because I was afraid that the subject matter was going to be too heavy for me. Unfortunately, I ended up being right. While I did watch the first episode, I didn't want to watch the rest of the series. Don't get me wrong, it's a well-written show. I like the characters, I like the cast, I like most of the things in the show. I just don't think the subject matter is for me. That being said, I looked it up to make sure that there was queer representation in the show, and I saw a headline that said something like Euphoria was going to be a game changer for queer representation, but in the entire pilot, there is an uncomfortable amount of sex, and all of it is heterosexual. Why? Look, I don't need everything to be queer in the pilot of the show, but could you have at least thrown a bone? I also think it's weird because the show has characters who are minors, but they're played by adults, so I guess it's okay to show them doing things. I don't know, the whole thing made me feel very uncomfortable. I felt a little weird replacing the show so late into the process of this video, but I was already going to see a movie that was creating some trouble with people who don't like queer people. And that was Lightyear. Lightyear includes a lesbian couple that's more or less used to show the passage of time, as there is a lot of time that passes in the movie Lightyear. So it makes sense to use a couple and their relationship in order to show that passage of time. They get engaged, they get married, they have a child, they have a 40th anniversary, they have a grandchild. They even kiss, which was something that a lot of people thought was controversial because it'll confuse children. I wasn't confused with that in Lightyear. I was confused by the fact that it doesn't follow 100% in line with the established Buzz Lightyear lore set up in the Toy Story franchise. Now, should Lightyear have done that? Should it have been a 100% faithful adaptation of that story? The issue isn't that it's a bad adaptation, because it's not an adaptation. It's a franchise film. It's supposed to be a movie made in the Toy Story universe that is the movie that Buzz Lightyear came from. Not only does this conflict with what John Lasseter said in the bonus disc of the 10th anniversary edition Toy Story DVD, but it also just conflicts with the culture of 1995 Hollywood. Lightyear just isn't a movie that would have been made at that time. Even if it were the movie that Buzz Lightyear came from, this would be more in line with a live-action reboot or remake of whatever Lightyear movie that was. It would have been great to just call this another Buzz Lightyear story, or a reimagining of the Buzz Lightyear story a la Cruella. I love Buzz Lightyear so much, but we already got a Buzz Lightyear story. I honestly feel like it would have been more interesting to get a Zurg story, especially if you wanted to reinterpret it a bit. We don't have a lot of information on Zurg within Toy Story. It would have been great to have a reboot, but that's not what it says it is, even though that's clearly what it's trying to be. Overall, the movie was okay, but the fact that it's trying to be connected to Toy Story in the way that it is holds it back for me. Tales from the Closet is the next show I took a look at. It is a vodcast, which is a video podcast. And it's just queer people talking about queer experiences. You can't get more queer than that, which does make this technically the queerest show. And it's also the show that I recommend the most because it was so informative. It was so validating for the queer experience to be shown in this way because it hadn't been shown before. Created by college humor writer and cast member Allie Beardsley for the streaming service Dropout, it was described by them as the show they wanted to see when they were a kid. I honestly think everyone should watch this show, especially if they're looking to be educated on the queer experience. I loved every part of the show, and it's especially hard to get something like this show wrong critically. There were a few technical errors, but other than that, everything was fine. I highly recommend this show. Then, the final show was Shera and the Princesses of Power. Netflix has a few shows that DreamWorks created for it, including some 80s reboots, which included Shera. Now, I don't know anything about Shera. I hardly know anything about He-Man. But what I do know is that this show had queer representation, kind of. It was most prominent in season 5, and I waited 52 episodes for two main characters to kiss, and they finally did, and it felt great. They kissed, and then they saved the world, which is how it should be done. While the show didn't feel like it was queer baiting like Arcane did, it definitely felt like the queerness was more of an afterthought. There weren't a lot of queer characters. This isn't exactly something that I'm going to put on for Pride Month, but it was a great show. If you liked The Owl House from earlier in the review, or if you liked the other shows that I mentioned that were similar to The Owl House, you'll definitely like Shera. It's lighter in tone compared to Arcane, but it still has its emotional moments, and it's overall a great show. It was also the longest show, 52 episodes, most of which being 24 minutes, none of them really breaking from a range of 22 to 25 minutes. In terms of queer characters, I'm pretty sure every character in this show is bisexual, which I think is great. There's also some characters who are in homosexual relationships, like Bo's dads and Spinnerella and Natasa. And there's also a non-binary character who's a shapeshifter named Double Trouble. One issue I have with non-binary characters is they're never just people, like regular people in this world. At least that's what it feels like. So what was the best show? Well, if Tales from the Closet is an outlier, not needing to be narratively sound, then Heartstopper was probably my favorite of all of them, followed by Shera and Our Flag Means Death. Arcane would probably go at the bottom of this list solely because of its actual writing issues, and the fact that I do feel like I got queer-baited with this show. I would still recommend all of these shows because I think they're great, and most of them have multiple seasons or are getting more seasons, which is great. But, of course, we have to talk about the show that was both the most queer and the best written, which was, of course, Lightyear.